The village had always been a cruel place for Aaliya, a 17-year-old girl whose weight became the center of every whisper, every cruel laugh, every mocking glance that cut deeper than a blade. Born into a respected family of traders, she carried herself with as much grace as she could, but her body, soft, round, heavy, was treated as a sin she never committed. Where her cousins were praised for their beauty and slimness, she was ridiculed as lazy, unworthy, and even cursed, though she worked harder than anyone to prove otherwise. When it came time for marriage talks, her parents found themselves humiliated at every turn. No suitor wanted her, and those who came asked for dowries so heavy that her family, despite being known as well off, couldn't bear the shame of agreeing. And so, in their desperation to silence gossip and punish her for bringing shame, they made a decision that would change her life forever. They handed her over to a man everyone mocked as a poor farmer, a widowed man named Rahman who lived far on the outskirts of the village, tilling dry land with his own calloused hands. To Aaliya, it felt like exile, a punishment disguised as marriage, a way for her parents to say, "You are no longer our burden." On the day of the wedding, there was no celebration, no drums, no songs, only whispers of villagers watching the heavy-set girl in a plain dress being escorted like an unwanted parcel, her face down, her heart pounding with shame as Rahman, tall and broad-shouldered, stood quietly with his straw hat pulled low, saying nothing as she was tied to him by a hurried knot of marriage vows. People sneered and laughed, some even clapped mockingly, saying, "Perfect, the fat girl for the poor man," as if their cruelty was the truth of her destiny. The carriage that carried her to his farm was old, creaking over dirt roads, and with every bump she felt her life breaking into pieces. She wondered if she would ever be loved, if her life would always be about mockery. When they finally arrived, she was surprised to see not the miserable shack she expected, but a humble wooden farmhouse surrounded by acres of green stretching into the horizon, though she mistook it for borrowed land he worked for others. Rahman remained quiet, his face weathered by sun and hard work, but his eyes, though stern, were strangely gentle when they fell on her. He offered her water and a seat, treating her not as a burden but as a guest, yet Aaliya's shame was too heavy. She thought every kindness was pity. In the nights that followed, she wept quietly, remembering her family's cold eyes, the gossip of the villagers, the weight of her body pressing on her heart more than her frame, while Rahman would rise at dawn, work till dusk, and return home with quiet dignity, never once complaining, never once mocking her. She noticed his silence was not disdain but peace, a kind of strength she had never seen before, but she could not yet believe it. When villagers passed by and mocked her, Rahman would sometimes look at them with such a cold, piercing glare that they fell silent, but he never explained, never comforted her with words, only with the way he ensured she was never without food, never left alone in danger, never treated as less. The shame of being given as punishment still burned inside her, but slowly, as days turned to weeks, she began to feel that maybe her punishment was not what it seemed. She saw Rahman's farm dogs rush to him with loyalty, she saw the workers in nearby fields respect him quietly though they called him poor, and she began to wonder, why did men with more money bow their heads when he passed? Why did children chase after him, laughing as if he were a hero? She didn't yet know the truth. That the man she had been forced to marry was not poor at all, but the hidden owner of thousands of acres of land and livestock, a man who chose simplicity and silence over arrogance, a man whose wealth could silence every mocking tongue, but she would only learn that when her own strength had been tested, when she proved to herself that her worth was far greater than the cruel weight of the world's laughter. For now, Chapter 1 closed on the image of Aaliya standing on the farmhouse porch one evening, her heart torn between pain and a strange spark of safety she had never known, watching Rahman work the fields as the sunset burned gold, whispering to herself, "Maybe this is not punishment, maybe this is where my story begins." Days melted into weeks, and weeks into months, and slowly Aaliya's heart began to shift from the bitterness of her forced marriage toward a quiet strength she had never known. At first she still heard the echoes of her family's cruel words, still felt the sting of villagers calling her the fat punishment, but each sunrise brought with it Rahman's unspoken lesson: dignity was not in words, nor in the body's appearance, but in the way a man, or woman, carried themselves. Rahman never scolded, never mocked, never treated her with the disdain she had grown used to. Instead, he lived with patience, discipline, and an iron calmness that made her curious. She began rising early, first out of shame, then out of admiration, watching him work his land with strong arms, watching how he treated every worker with respect, how he gave bread to hungry children who came running to his gate, how even the poorest widow could knock at his door and never leave empty-handed. One afternoon, when a drought threatened the village, Aaliya saw Rahman open granaries she hadn't known existed, feeding hundreds while others hoarded. Whispers began to ripple through the air. Perhaps he was not so poor after all, but Aaliya still did not know the full truth until one day, while exploring the land on her own, she walked past the rows of fields and stumbled upon endless pastures, stretching farther than her eyes could see, filled with herds of cattle, sheep, and horses. Her heart raced as she asked one of the workers, and the man bowed his head, saying, "This all belongs to Rahman Sahib." Shock overwhelmed her. She had been punished by being given to a man who owned not just acres but thousands of them, whose herds numbered in the thousands, whose quiet power made even the wealthiest merchants bend low in respect. That night she confronted Rahman, tears streaming down her face as she asked why he let her and the whole village believe he was poor, and he answered with the gentlest of smiles, "Because wealth can buy land, cattle, and houses, but it cannot buy respect. Respect comes when you rise with the sun, work with your hands, and never let pride grow larger than your heart. They punished you by giving you to me, Aaliya, but in truth, they gave me the greatest blessing." For the first time in her life, she felt beautiful, not because her body had changed, but because someone saw her worth beyond it. The days that followed brought a transformation, not of weight, but of spirit. Aaliya began to help Rahman manage the lands, learning to balance ledgers, to organize workers, to speak with authority she never imagined she could wield. Villagers who once mocked her now bowed their heads, seeking her guidance, whispering about how the obese girl had become the mistress of vast lands. When her parents returned, ashamed and trembling, asking forgiveness for casting her away, she stood tall, not with vengeance but with grace, saying, "You thought me a punishment, but I was always a blessing, only you were too blind to see it." That moment, more than wealth or land, was her true victory, the moment she broke free from shame and claimed her dignity. And so, what began as humiliation became destiny, what began as punishment became her greatest rise. This story reminds us all that no matter how the world labels you, no matter what scars you carry, your worth cannot be measured by cruel tongues or shallow eyes. It lies within, waiting to be discovered by those who see with truth. And if you felt the power of Aaliya's journey, if her strength and Rahman's wisdom touched your heart, then don't forget to support more stories like this. Hit the subscribe button, share this video, and join us as we bring you tales that inspire, heal, and remind you that even in life's cruelest punishments, blessings may be hidden just beneath the surface.